We are hungry! We are hungry! We are hungry!
You already know this picture. Stone stacked to the sky, a civilization obsessed with death, and somewhere down there, in the heat, thousands of slaves, dragging blocks under the whip for a god king who didn't care if they lived or died. Almost none of that is true. The men who built the tombs of the pharaohs weren't slaves. They were paid. They were skilled. They had houses and days off and opinions.
Beautiful morning.
Yes, the sun is warm.
Their job title, the real one, written down, was servant in the place of truth. And to show you who they really were, we're going to follow one of them through the rhythm of an ordinary life and the one day that broke it. This is home, a village in the desert west of the Nile that we now call Deir el-Medina. It didn't grow here by accident. A pharaoh built it on purpose to house the workers who made the royal tombs. 68 houses inside a wall in the middle of nowhere because the job these men did was secret. They dug and painted the tombs in the Valley of the Kings, just over that ridge where the pharaohs were buried, which meant these men knew exactly where the treasure was. So the king kept them close, kept them comfortable. The houses shared walls, like row homes. Some families ran a shop out of the front room.
The dust is settling.
There was no well. Every drop of water was carried in, because nobody here farmed. These weren't peasants. They were craftsmen, artists even. And every 10 days, the men left.
2 days to the mine, then we return.
Stay safe, my brother.
Bye! Bring back stones!
They'd walk over the ridge to the Valley of the Kings, and they'd stay there. 10 days at a time, sleeping in little huts by the worksite. Then 2 days off, back home. 10 on, 2 off. That was the week. The men who built eternity for the pharaohs had a weekend. The work itself was skilled. Cutting the chambers, plastering the walls, painting the gods and the spells that would carry a king into the afterlife. This was craft, and it was paid. Not in coins. Egypt didn't have money yet. It was paid in things you could live on. A basic month's wage came to about 10 loaves worth of wheat and enough barley for a couple of jars of beer, plus vegetables, fish, dates, cakes, meat, oil. Grain was the paycheck. You could trade it for anything. And yes, they were in part paid in beer. We even know some of them drank too much of it because the scribes wrote down who missed work. And next to a few names, the reason given was the ancient Egyptian equivalent of calling in hungover. Which brings us to the most important thing these men ever did, because one month, the pay didn't come. It was the 29th year of the pharaoh Ramesses III, around 1157 BCE. Egypt was strained. Wars, bad harvests, officials skimming what they could, and a fortune being spent on a royal festival. And so the grain that fed the tomb workers and their families was late. A day late. Then a week. The family started going hungry. And these men, the ones we're told were powerless, waited 18 days. And then they did something no one in recorded history had ever done before. They stopped working. They walked off the job. They crossed the checkpoint out of the necropolis. And a scribe named Amennakht wrote down exactly what happened next. Year 29, second month of the inundation, day 10. Today the work squad crossed the walls of the necropolis, shouting,
We are hungry! We are hungry!
"We are hungry!"
Hungry! We are hungry! We are hungry! We are hungry! We are hungry!
They marched to the great mortuary temples, and they sat down. This is the first recorded labor strike in human history. Not a riot, a strike. Organized, deliberate, repeated day after day until someone listened. Officials came to move them along, to promise, to stall, to send them back. And the workers answered,
We are here because of hunger and thirst.
and here's the part that matters most. In Egypt, there was a word, ma'at, balance, order. And keeping ma'at was supposed to be the pharaoh's job, his alone. But when the pharaoh failed, when the system broke, these workers decided that they would set it right themselves. So what were they going home to? What was worth striking for? A house full of noise. Kids, named most of them after gods, because a child was a blessing worth marking. A board game called Senate, played on the floor after dinner, the same board pharaohs were buried with. And pets. So many pets. Cats, especially, loved then exactly the way we love them now. We have the drawings to prove it. These were people who wrote letters to each other, who sued each other constantly over borrowed tools and unpaid debts, and who insulted whom, who fell in love and cheated and gossiped about it and wrote that down too. We know their neighbors' names, we know their scandals. They were, in every way that counts, us, just a very long time ago. So let's go back to where we started. The tombs, the mummies, the gold, the whole death-obsessed reputation. Here's the truth. They weren't obsessed with death. They were obsessed with life. They loved being alive so much. The food, the family, the games, the cats, the beer, that they couldn't stand the thought of it ending. So they built a way to take it with them. The tomb wasn't a monument to dying. It was a promise that the living would go on. The people who built those tombs called their home the place of truth. They spent their lives making sure their kings would live forever, and in doing it, in their letters, their lawsuits, their strike, their games on the floor after dinner, they made sure we'd remember that they lived too. They weren't obsessed with death. They were obsessed with life. Just like you.